Hello. Hello.
Good morning, Mr. Vakil. You can hear me?
Good. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay. I'm seeing people attending. Yeah, people have started logging in. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. So people are logging in. Yeah. Good. You look fresh and upbeat, nevertheless.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Good. Good. Yeah. So I think it's already it's already done. Yes, Sambhavi. Okay. Fine. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Good morning, members of Baroda Book Browsers and all those who are viewing and participating in this meeting. Uh, Before we start the proceedings, let me all wish you a very good health and request you all to continue to take all precautions and be vigilant to stay safe and take care of your health because this coronavirus pandemic, unfortunately, is still at large, and in fact, it is rising in India across. So it is all the more imperative to continue to maintain safe distances, avoid close contacts, and all other precautions which the health professionals and the government of the day have been impressing upon all of us to follow and observe. With that note, let me welcome, and it's a matter of delight to have this yet another virtual meeting of Baroda Book Browsers. Today's book is an autobiography. Title of the book is Infidel, which is an account or a life story thus far of a lady who is now, I think, Dutch and US citizen, but Somalian origin, Ayan Hirsi Ali. Uh, this book or this autobiography is once again reinforcing one of the universal truth, or I would rather put it a fallacy, and a very adverse feature of human society. And what is that? Ever since the dawn of human civilization, what we have experienced and we are still experiencing till date or to this date is that our society, in almost all spheres, when it comes to occupying the positions or having a say in the mainstream of affairs of the society, it is not gender agnostic. What I mean by not being gender agnostic is that females quintessentially have been at the receiving end in our society, and that's an unfortunate, inconvenient truth. We have so far not been able to do away with it, including in advanced societies and across the world. But, coming back to this book, uh, this lady was born and brought up in Somalia, a North African country, which is still among the most backward countries of the world. And in a very regressive society where repression and oppression and sheer conservatism, which is widely prevalent, was first-hand experience from birth by this lady, Ayan. And then she is one of those blessed individuals who can be prescient and be self-reflecting individuals from early life. She was able to experience those trials, tribulations, and even trauma of growing up in that conservative society, and certain religious practices of Islam, which her family practiced, subjected her to some humiliating experiences. And the rebel in her, the fierce determination, finally took the better of her such repressive, oppressive existence. And once she was in the early adulthood, she managed to get out of the country. So, along this route, what experiences she has had, what challenges she faced, what kind of certain dogmas that she encountered as being a Muslim woman, so on and so forth, are with great details and certain amount of conviction and great gumption she has portrayed throughout this book. So, which I will ask Meera, our reviewer today, to deal with in a few minutes from now at length. But let me now turn over to Meera, our reviewer for the day. Well, Meera is a corporate trainer, professional, and she loves and engages herself actively in training the millennials who have just entered the corporate lives. And she also trains those who are in the mid career in the corporate life, or the pipeline leadership issues, mainly relating to the soft skills. And she is an avid reader, very fond of traveling. Of course, in this pandemic period, like everyone else, she is home confined at the moment. And she loves to look at the life and situations around her through the prism of her three children's, should I say, behavior or outlook or eyes or whatever it is. So she's a totally committed family person. Her husband is also extremely supportive. Rajesh is a very successful businessman. Meera has reviewed 6 books earlier. I think she began in October 2013, and she came with a reference of one of my friends, and she had just joined the Baroda book browsers. Ever since then, whenever she has asked me to suggest some books, I have chosen the female-oriented topics for her to take the books as a review. In fact, she did a brilliant review of both the books earlier, female centric, Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, and I think last year, again, a biopic of Reham Khan from Pakistan. So that's about her experience and the presentations made in Baroda book browsers. Before I hand it over to her and much ado, 2 quotes from this book I liked the most, and probably that describes the fierce, ferocious, absolutely intense person, this autobiography writer, Ayan is. Uh, she says there is a huge difference between being tolerant and tolerating intolerance. Very loaded, very profound statement. And something in the same breath, he says, which in my opinion, in current times, is more relevant than it was at any time. And the second one, which he says that there are times when something is got to be spoken up, because silence in such times often becomes an accomplice to injustice. I like these two sentences very much. And in fact, if you see throughout the book, reflection of this spirit, this feeling, then you can attribute to her this seminal two statements. And then finally, let me tell you, Ayan's husband is also a very famous scholar, a very fine professor of UK. His name is Niall Ferguson. I have read his one book. I recommend that book. Anybody who wants to know about how money, banking, the bond market have evolved in last 800 years, the ascent of that, then please read his book, Ascent of Money. Anyway, without further ado, now let me hand over the floor to Meera. Next 45 minutes, over to you, Meera. And before I hand over again, thank you for participating in huge number, as has been the practice. Kindly keep putting your remarks and questions as briefly as possible in the chat box, which will be taken up after the review is over, and it will be dealt with by Meera in the question answer hours. Over to you, Meera. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sunil Vakil, for such a wonderful introduction. I hope I'm audible to everybody.
Yes,
Uh,
at least to me. Yeah, fine. Thank you.
yes. Uh, I will share the screen, and the screen is visible, I hope. The screen is visible.
Yes, to me. Yeah. People will
And
not
I
be able
have,
to respond because they are muted. Only I'll be able
right,
to respond on behalf of the
yes,
participants. Yes, it's
thank you.
visible. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. And I am starting the timer of 45 minutes now. Uh, Good morning, everyone. Very happy to be on this virtual platform presenting an autobiography titled Infidel by Ayan Hirsi Ali. Thank you, Mr. Vakil, for recommending this book. Every year you recommend a unique book for me, and reading it and presenting it is sheer joy. Well, before I begin this book, a small disclaimer from my end, the review, that the opinions and the content expressed in this presentation is solely the author's. The purpose of this book review is to do just that, review the book. Making this presentation does not mean that I, the reviewer, am either in agreement or in disagreement of the opinions expressed in it. I have only tried to be honest to the job of being a reviewer at BBB, and the author of this book is already leading a controversial life. I would like to continue leading a non controversial life after having made this presentation. Thank you.
You will, I'm sure.
Uh, well, let's talk about the book, The Infidel. This is one of the many books which is written by the same author, the names of other books being Nomad, Prey, Heretic, and The Caged Virgin. The Caged Virgin was one of her most popular books. This particular book, Infidel, is a New York Times bestseller, and it's a profoundly affecting memoir. And it's a celebration of triumph over adversity. At some levels, I felt it was almost like a real life fairy tale where you see this young bright little girl evolving out of dutiful obedience to become an outspoken and pioneering freedom fighter. It's fascinating at times how the transition happens. And why is this book relevant today? Because today Western governments are struggling to balance democratic ideals with religious pressures. And the story that Ayan tells us could be very timely and significant in this particular context. A little more about Ayan before I move on. Ayan is a political superstar and a champion of free speech. And not only is she highly admired, but she's also highly controversial. In 2005, the Time magazine recognized Ali as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. She has received many prestigious awards, which includes awards for free speech and for moral courage. Ali is an activist for human rights. She's the founder of AHA Foundation, which promotes and protects women's rights
अपने
and girls'
चिल्लू
rights.
बुके
And
में
she also
सेक्रेटरी
gets campus students involved
बता थे
in this battle with her.
अपन का
Ayan migrated
बड़े
from,
बड़े
so
पेपर
originally she was born in Somalia. Then somewhere in the middle of her life, she migrated to Netherlands. And from Netherlands, later on, in 2013, she migrated to the United States. And today she is a US citizen living under protection there. And even though she is under constant threat, demonized by the reactionary Islamists and politicians, she has been disowned by her father and she has been declared an outcast by her family and clan. Yet she refuses to be silenced. She's a brave soul. So let's go on and hear her story. Uh, the entire book of 350 pages is basically divided into two halves. The first half of the book talks about how she was raised in different countries, most of them failing economies, from her birth to her teenage. And somewhere in the middle of the book, the story changes over, transitions to an entirely new life that she's exposed to post her teenage. So I'm first going to take you through the first half of her journey because, as they say, that we are nothing but the end product of our shattered childhood. So, what childhood she went through is very important to know so that we can relate to what she has achieved today in spite of those adversities. So, let me begin so Ayan was born in 1969. In the same year, the country that she was born in, Somalia, was ruled by a man called Siad Barre. Siad Barre was also known as Monster or Big Mouth or a Flying, and he was the president of the country. He took over the country in a coup. His regime was classic Soviet client state with single party, single trade union, a women's organization, and a young pioneer group. And he spent a lot of money on weaponry. But one good thing about him was that he believed in a good education system. And so Ayan was very lucky to get good quality education in early childhood. And communism was practiced because Siad Barre was trained in Russia. So communism was practiced in Somalia, and this communism basically meant a lot of hardship for the common man of Somalia. So whether it was standing in long lines to get their ration, or if they wanted anything desirable or delicious to eat, they had to go to the black market. Everything was very challenging. Uh, as all of us know that that area of the world has a lot of in-clan fighting. There are a lot of clans fighting each other. Siad Barre had a different vision. He wanted Somalia to be one big united nation and he discouraged clans. And his posters hung everywhere in Mogadishu. This is the description which Ayan gives, and how his tyranny was generating fear in people. His special police burst into houses, took people away, tortured and killed them. In fact, Ayan's father, who worked with the SSTF, one of the major forces against Siad Barre, he was also imprisoned during this duration, and Ayan did not get to see him for a long duration in time. Eventually, her father escaped from prison and went to Ethiopia, and after a few years, only Ayan could meet him. Now, if conditions outside the house were communistic and dangerous, the conditions in the house were also quite dismal. Ayan was raised by two women primarily, her mother and her grandmother, along with her two siblings, Huwai and Mahar. Ayan, Ayan's mother was actually educated, and in fact, she had had a love marriage with her father, which was also quite a modern thing to happen at that stage of life. But she was always busy grappling with life and its chores because the father was absent. So, in the absence of the mother, Ayan was primarily raised by her grandmother. And her grandmother was basically a tribal woman with pretty backward ideas. And I would like to share some of the conditioning that Ayan underwent as she was a child. So, some things that her grandmother taught her. For example, if you honor the names of your bloodline, they will keep you alive. So, Ayan's grandmother used to make them recite the names of their ancestors up to 8 generations backward. And that was the proof that you were a good Islamic child. And other things which her grandmother taught her, that if a girl's virginity is despoiled, she damages the honor of her father, uncles, brother, and male cousins. Um, Also, as she was growing up, things that she heard, that a virgin silence is the proper answer to a marriage proposal. A woman is labeled a witch if she has a strong will, disobedient tendency, or waywardness. And a Bari woman, they used this special term called as Bari woman, who is a pious slave, and she honors and serves her husband's family without any questions. Also, a grandmother used to tell her that if you grow up into such a woman, you are sure to be rewarded in the hereafter by Allah. Hereafter is the life that every Islamic person is promised after life here on earth. Now, apart from the atmosphere outside and within the home, one very scary incident that happened in Ayan's childhood, which really, literally, as I was reading, made my hair stand at its edge, was the incident of female genital mutilation. So, according to the Islamic belief, genital mutilation is a requisite, excision as they call it, is a requisite to make girls pure. And it is very widely practiced. It was very widely practiced in Somalia, and most girls, by the time they were 8 to 10 years old, had already had this genital mutilation happening to them. And then they were soon down there till they were married so that the virginity was, ensured. Now, Ayan used to be sent to a madrasa for education on Quran. And once she got into a fight with some bully girls older to her. And while fighting, one of the girls called her a kintali. Kintali was an insult for being impure, someone who's not undergone this purification process. And when her grandmother heard it, her grandmother decided that Ayan needed to undergo this process. And it was done in a very rudimentary manner where some elders of the house collect in the house. The child is held tight and the genital mutilation takes place. There are no antibiotics, there are no doctors. As such, the practice itself is wrong. But this is how the girls are made pure. I was shattered to read that even very recently, 200 million victims all over the world still undergo this practice. Now, Ayan's father was a relatively modern man, and he had strictly instructed Ayan's mother that my girls will never undergo this process. But taking advantage of the fact that father was away and the mother was at work, the grandmother, who was very bound by social traditions, made sure that this was done with Ayan. So this was how her early childhood in Somalia was. Now, because the family was separate and could not stay with each other, eventually Ayan's mother decided that it was time to be united with her husband, and they started looking for a place where they could be united. So, out of the various options that they had, Ayan's father used to stay in Ethiopia. But according to Ayan's mother, Ethiopia was a kafir country because there was a lot of Christianity prevalent there. So, Ayan's mother refused to move to Ethiopia, and they decided to move to Saudi Arabia, which is called Allah's own land. So they moved to Saudi Arabia, and during their duration of stay there, they stayed in two places. For some time, they stayed in Mecca, and then for some time, they stayed in Riyadh. Shifting from Somalia to Saudi Arabia was a big transition in Ayan's life. Here, she noticed that religious practices became more rigid, both within her house and outside of it. Her mother became very particular on how the scarf should be worn, how the prayers should be said, and what time the prayers should be said, having a bath before saying the prayer. So everything became strict according to the scriptures and the law of Prophet Muhammad. On the streets of Saudi Arabia, racial discrimination was rampant, and blacks were being called abids. She was also sent to a Quran school here with her siblings. And what she noticed at these Quran schools was that they were not being taught the meaning of what they were reading, but they were just being taught to learn it by heart, which raised a question into her mind as to why they were doing that. Now, after a few months of living in Mecca, they were reunited with their father. And their father actually was much more liberal. Their father was of the firm belief that Islam is a religion of peace. And he managed to convince Ayan in every argument that Ayan made as to why certain rules were required. He also let Ayan do a little exploring and experimenting as compared to her mother. So when they used to pray, he used to tell Ayan that you can pray with me, otherwise, men and women are supposed to pray separately. So he was a little less strict, which made Ayan fonder of all the religious practices because she could now understand what she was doing and why she was doing. Apart from this, life in Saudi Arabia was not very pleasant. Apart from the beautiful Grand Mosque which they used to visit, Saudi Arabia basically meant intense heat, filth, and a lot of cruelty. And heads and hands were cut off in public square. Flogging was regular. Women were stoned, and the society seemed to be fixated in the Middle Ages. Ayan's father always said that he disapproved of all these barbaric practices because he felt that the Arab desert culture was perverting Islam. Why this is important to know? Because somewhere in her childhood, the route to this, rebellion took place where she started asking questions on the rules and regulations of Islam. Now, apart from the various descriptions of incidents, the various mindset displays of people of Saudi Arabia are also made in the book at length because this was the longest period she spent in one of the strictest Islamic regimes. And very funnily, she said that everything from non functioning air conditioners to taps to non compliant women was blamed on Jews by the Arabs, and all women must be in care of men, whether to get a cab or to shop for groceries. So Ayan's mother could not go and shop for groceries without her younger brother. And her younger brother was not even a teenager at that time, but a boy was required to go with her to the market. Apart from family, men did not look or even talk to women. And even the transport arrangements for men and women were in separate vehicles. They could not travel together. Doors of houses, most men, when they went away in the morning to work, they would lock the doors of the houses from outside. So women could not leave the house. The backyards of all the houses were connected. So women entertained themselves in the backyards together. Women had to wear the burqas and they were rampantly beaten or abused by their husbands. And however young the son may be, it was the son who ruled the household. All this was an experience for her in hardcore Islamic practices till 1979 when she was around 10 years old and they were deported from Saudi Arabia and they had to leave. The first choice that they had was going to Sudan, but Sudan did not accept them, so eventually they moved to Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia was a totally different experience. It had Christianity prevalent, and Ethiopia had a lot of poverty. But Ayan really enjoyed her life here because people here were kinder and they were happier. And because there was less of an Islamic influence, even the restrictions on girls was much lesser. However, SSDF, with whom her father was working and he was an active revolutionary, that was going down due to poor governance. And her father felt that if they continued to stay in Ethiopia, it would not be safe for the girls. So within a year, her father decided that the whole family had to move to Kenya. Again, her mother was very unhappy with this choice. The only choice her mother was ever happy with was being in Saudi Arabia because that was Allah's own country. Whereas Ethiopia and Kenya were not finding favor with her mother because it was again an infidel country. However, life in Nairobi in Kenya had different views for Ayan as compared to her previous three countries. The previous three countries were all failed economies: Somalia, Ethiopia, and Saudi Arabia. Whereas now in Nairobi, Kenya, it was not a failed economy. And She was exposed to a lot of other religions, a lot of other nationalities, and then she joined school and started reading literature from other countries. She read books by Sidney Sheldon. She read books by Jeffrey Archer. She read books such as romantic novels by Barbara Cartland and Mills and Boons. And she realized that life was not the same for women all over the world. In the meanwhile, the marriage of her parents broke down. Her father had a first wife, her mother was the second wife, and now her father separated and married a third lady. At this stage, her mother became a very bitter woman, and something hardened inside of her. So also Ayan felt very cheated, and she felt very bitter. And however, the clan continued taking care of them. This experience of her parents' marriage breaking down made her reject all the marriage proposals she got, and she decided to study and get a job for herself. Her mother, due to the bitterness inside of her, often used to beat her up, and those descriptions in the novel are really sad. The amount she was beaten and the amount of household chores that she had to do as a duty because her brother would not help and her sister was too young. And because of the rebellious nature of Ayan, she also used to get into arguments with all the Islamic preachers who came home to teach them Quran, to the extent that she also once had a skull fracture. However, with every experience, she became stronger and more determined. Now, growing up as a teenager in Kenya, one other experience that she had is that many Malims used to come and they used to preach and teach the girls and the men about Quran and about Islam. And a special Malim finds a mention in the book time and again called Bokol Swam. He promoted traditional Islamic beliefs rampantly, and most of his followers were women. He used to teach women how to be obedient slaves to the men. And one major belief propagated by people like him was that there is an evil worldwide crusade aimed at eradicating Islam, directed by the Jews and the whole godless West. They were taught that as Muslims, they should, be oppose the West, and Islam needs defending, and the goal should be a global Islamic government for everyone. This is what they were taught by Bokol Swam. Everything that she learned was in contrast to what she learned at school, to the literature that she read at school. And as a result of that, in spite of wearing a burqa, in spite of doing her prayers the number of times required a day, there was more and more rebellion brewing inside of her. I would like to share some thoughts on female subjugation that were in her mind at this time. She used to ask, how can God say that men rule over women? When He is the creator, how could He say something like that? Is He fair? Then, questioning obedience to men would mean that Satan was speaking to a woman. This is what she was taught, and she was highly opposed to that. The justification of women being asked to endure more was that they were emotionally stronger. Whenever she asked questions in the class, this is the answer that she was given. Women were not allowed to be jealous of their husband's new wife. So her mother, whenever she used to welcome children of the first wife or the new wife, had to have a proper behavior with everybody, and women were not allowed to express jealousy. If you are a Muslim girl, you disappear until there is no you inside you. So why? Why she felt was it necessary to lose your personality completely after you were married? And in one of the classes, a very funny incident happened where she had an argument with Bokol Swam, where he was claiming that a man's sinful erotic thoughts were always the fault of a woman who incited them. Covering her face and body was not enough. Her eyes, her perfume, or even her high heels could incite the man. When she asked this question, that what if the reverse was true, then everybody in her class and her sir, everybody either was angry or started laughing. But her thoughts did not calm down at whatever resistance she faced from those around her. So basically, now I'm coming to the end of her childhood, the first part of her life, where she was already a teenager And by this time, in mid 90s, Somalia had been pushed into a political void, and there was a mass exodus of people from Somalia to neighboring countries because Siad Barre has been asked to resign by the heads of all the clans. And Siad Barre, as he came down, he brought down the entire Somalia country with him. Refugees were found in large numbers at borders of most of the states in very poorly kept camps. In fact, the descriptions which are given in the book are really shattering. And Ayan at that time also showed quite a bit of courage by going to the Kenyan border and helping out as many Somalians as she could to get them into Kenya. The civil war had begun, and there was a lot of mass murder happening. There were rapes happening. There was looting happening within Somalia, and people were escaping without anything on their hands. And during this period, when they were in Kenya and there was a lot of turbulence, people were looking out for positive openings. And one day her father returned from a madrasa, from a mosque, and said that he had fixed her marriage to a cousin. Uh, and he said that the guy was really nice and he had promised her hand in marriage. The name of her cousin was Osman Musa, and he was from Canada. And her father was really happy that she would have a good life in Canada. Uh, Ayan was very unhappy with this, and she said that she would have preferred to meet the guy before she was promised. But that was, however, not how things happened. And it was, as I told you before, a virgin has to give silence as her consent. So, however, Ayan decided that she wanted to meet the guy, and with her brother and sister went to meet him. And when she met him, she realized that she disliked him thoroughly. Apart from the fact that he was bald, which she thoroughly disliked, she also found him intellectually and physically non stimulating. And whenever she tried to have conversations with him, because she did have some level of education, she found that he was not able to respond in the same quality as her comments. So, uh, the plan was that immediately after marriage, Osman was going to return to Canada and he would be sending her papers and tickets, and she would follow him there. She went to meet her mother and father after meeting Osman to tell them that she did not want to follow him to Canada, but both her mother and father, who were staunch Islamists, felt that she was just joking. And they said that she had to be serious and a dutiful daughter and she had to follow him. But her mind was already made up that this is where life has to change for her, and there was no way that she was flying to Canada. So she got her tickets eventually, and the tickets would require for her to have the first halt from Kenya to Germany, and from Germany, from Frankfurt or Dusseldorf, she would have to then move on to Toronto. So she got her tickets and she flew down to Germany. And in Germany, one of her far off relatives was supposed to take care of her for 2 to 3 days before a connecting flight took her to Canada. And this is where the story of Ayan's life takes a turn. And pretty much like a fairy tale, where the first half of the fairy tale of Cinderella, for example, is sad, and then the second half suddenly takes a transition and everything starts changing. This is what happened with Ayan's life, and the page turned. Now, as she landed in Germany, what she noticed was that everything was different from the time she alighted her flight, and she saw that she wanted a cab to go to the address that her relative had given to her. She talked to the cab driver. The cab was a beautiful Mercedes. She asked the cab driver, "Will you surely drive me in this cab itself?" Because she was not used to honesty. She was used to bargaining. The cab driver quoted a standard price and he drove her down safely to the hotel, which was something unthinkable of in the country she had lived before. As she walked down the streets, she saw neat and clean streets where everybody was going about their business in a very orderly fashion. There was calm and peace everywhere, and men and women sat together at cafes, sometimes even holding hands and talking to each other, and no fire from hell was breaking down on them. The policemen were highly helpful, and They would, give her instructions in case she was lost. The streets were well labeled, and she felt that she had been thrown into another world, which was calm and orderly. And immediately the thought came into her mind that if she went to Canada, she may have a very decent life, but she would always be a minor. She knew that another kind of life was possible because now, on the streets of Germany, she could see it, smell it in the air around her. The kind of life she has always wanted and dreamt of. She saw people having real education, real jobs. She had read about this in the literature, and a real marriage with the person she loved. She wanted to become a person, an individual with a life of her own. So at this stage, as she was roaming around the streets of Germany, an idea crept up to her. She had two choices. One, take a flight after 2 days and fly to Canada. But she didn't have to go to Canada. She could disappear here, like someone in the book. And on Friday, the 24th of July, 1992, she boarded a train to Holland refugee camp because she realized that there was a refugee camp there where someone she knew from Somalia was parked, and she bolted into the unknown without telling her relatives where she was going. She just took a small knapsack with her papers and passport in it and left. And that is the day she sees as her real birthday, the birth of her as a person taking decisions about the life she had. So, this is how her story took a turn from Kenya to Germany, from Germany to Amsterdam. Life in the refugee camp brought many thoughts and situations. She reached the refugee camp. When she reached the refugee camp, they asked her for a name. She did not want to be tracked down, so she decided to change her name. Her original name was Ayan Hirsi Magan. She changed it to Ayan Hirsi Ali. She took her grandfather's name so that she would not be tracked down by her father and her brother. As she joined the refugee camp, she was amazed to see the facilities, the blankets, the beds, the food which was provided to these refugees. And she asked the question constantly that who provides for all this? And she was told that the state and the rule of law. And she was amazed because she had never lived before in a country where the government actually cared for its own citizens, leave aside the refugees. Uh, she knew that if she told the real story of why she was in the camp, of escaping from a marriage, she would not be allowed to be in the camp or she would not be given asylum. So she lied at this stage. She told the authorities that there was a danger of her losing life. Her life had a threat because she was a Somalian refugee, and that is how they admitted her into the camp. This change of name and this lying would be a very important and crucial factor which would impact her life at a later stage in life. While she was here in the camp, she gave up her headscarf, her coat. One by one, she started exploring and experimenting based on the girls she used to see around. She started wearing jeans and tunic. And every time she would dare to do something, break a rule, she would think that some fire from hell is going to come down on me and burn me. But every time she did it, nothing happened. And she was amazed that she could actually break the rules without being harmed by Allah. She also learned cycling and swimming, and she was good with her English. So she offered her English language skills as a volunteer because a lot of translation was required. In fact, for a major part of her life while she was there, she used to do the job of a translator to earn money. Eventually, however, her husband, father, and brother tracked her down, and she had to face a lot of pressure from her community seniors. And she, however, flatly refused to go to Canada. She said, "My trial was here. At stake was my right to rule my own life." And she said somehow she got the courage to refuse that she would go to Canada. And her community declared her an outcast, and her father disowned her, said he would not talk to her again. However, through all these trials and tribulations, she got accepted as a pink passport holder on September 1st, 1992, and from then on, she could freely stay in Holland. Now, while she was in Holland, the constant question in her mind was, as she made friends and as she got connected to the Dutch people, she would constantly ask, how do you get to be this way? Because she was always taught that the places where Allah was worshipped and His laws were obeyed are always peaceful and wealthy. whereas unbeliever and kafir countries would always be ignorant, poor, and at war. But here it was quite the opposite. At the same time, she was also very embarrassed by how so many Somalis accepted the welfare money and then turned against the society that gave it to them. They would abuse the system. They had realized that the Dutch people don't like being called racist. So if they wanted some special benefits, they would just tell the Dutch people that you're being racist, and the Dutch people would give them whatever they wanted. So she was very surprised to see this contrast in behavior, and this kind of exposure to life in Holland led in her a desire to study political science. She wanted to know how governments like these were formed, how rules and regulations like these, which were successful, were made. And so she began first a vocational course in one of the local universities and later on joined the world class university, Leiden University. And at college, at the University of Sweden, she was exposed to two specific mindsets: the Dutch mindset and the immigrant mindset. What was the Dutch mindset? The Dutch, she realized, were deeply attached to their freedom, and Holland was the capital of European enlightenment. And almost 400 years ago, the condition in Europe were very similar to the condition of the country she had come from, where the rule of God had applied. But the Europeans had succeeded in breaking that, and now this place was ruled by equality of each individual. And she realized that because of their guilt about their past in Indonesia and during Hitler's reign, the Dutch were always trying to be extra accepting of the differences between their lifestyle and that of the immigrants arriving here. And this is where the commitment to freedom, individual freedom and people freedom, took hold of Ayan. But she also saw that the downside of this, giving everybody a lot of freedom by Dutch, means the Muslim immigrants were allowed to form their own pillar in the Dutch society. They were given special permissions to set up Quranic schools, and special subsidies were given to Muslim community groups. At this stage, Ayan, by the virtue of her education, was aware of Article 23, which promotes, a lot of freedom for all kind of minorities who come in. And she felt that actually this article was causing more harm than good. And she felt that it should be abolished, and the government fund should not be used to set up specific community schools, but to set up ideologically neutral schools, so that the children would not be raised in a bubble, but they would be raised to respect pluralism. The other mindset which she explored at this stage was, the Dutch mindset, where the immigrant mindset. So the Dutch compassion resulted in policies that perpetuate cruelty, because all the immigrants were living in their own bubble. Thousands of men and women, Muslim women and children, were being abused. There was excision, there was honor killing, and they were being beaten up, the women, because the Dutch let them be. The Dutch would not insist on integrating them into their lifestyle. The Muslims never bothered to learn Dutch. They never integrated with the Dutch. In fact, most Muslims would marry women from their villages and come and live in their own special bubbles here. And Holland was trying to be tolerant for the sake of consensus, but consensus was empty, and a whole new ethnic underclass of immigrants had been formed, which was very insular. They were rejecting the values which knit together the Dutch society, and social unrest was on cards. And amongst all the immigrants, the Muslim immigrants were the least integrated in this community. So at this stage, Ayan Hirsi Ali says that we cannot give Islam a free pass on the ground of multicultural sensitivity. Then came the attacks of 9/11. This is the time where, Ayan was already working in her capacity as a translator. And when she saw the news on television, one of the clippings showed a group of Muslim kids jubilating on the Holland streets for the 9/11 attacks. And yet the people in her office, they knew that she was Islamic, so that she would not feel bad. They said that how can people blame all Islamists for the job of some terrorists? and she felt that this was wrong. She felt that people of Holland had forgotten that it was possible for people of other countries to wage war, destroy property, to kill and impose laws of virtue because of the call of God. And at this stage, she realized, she questioned her belief in God. She said that war had been declared in the name of Islam, and I had to make a choice. Where did I stand on Islam? She picked up the Quran and the Hadith, and she was very unhappy to find that most of the quotes which bin Laden gave there in his speeches were there. So she felt that because of centuries of not being allowed to integrate reason into Islamic belief, there was monstrous behavior happening. And these are her words when she finally decided that she was an atheist and not going to be a believer anymore, that I could not be honest with others unless I was honest with myself. I wanted to comply with the goals of religion, which are to be a better and a more generous person, without, however, suppressing my free will and forcing myself to obey inhuman rules. I was no longer afraid to lie. I was no longer going to lie. I was not going to be afraid of the hereafter. So now this was a time where Ayan decided to move into politics. She had finished her master's degree at the age of 30, and she was earning her own money in Holland. In June 2001, she procured the job of a junior researcher in a think tank, and her article started being published on the behavior of immigrants. And by then, the migrant issue had become a very hot debate in Holland, either because they were not being integrated or because of the abuse of the women. So Ayan continued to write very explosive articles. In fact, at that time, the Miss Universe competition happened in Africa, Miss World competition happened in Africa, and there were riots in Africa based on comments which were made against Prophet Muhammad by some BBC reporter. And Ayan spoke in her support, and again, she invited a lot of anger. So the Dutch people were on her side because they believed that everybody has a right to their opinion, freedom of speech. But the migrant population and the Islamists of Europe in general were very against her, and she started receiving a lot of death threats. Sometimes even her father would get calls. And in 2002, when the cabinet in Holland fell and elections were called, by then she was a very popular figure in Holland. So she was called by the head of the Liberal Party to run for the parliament of there. Now, as we move on, Ayan felt that it was time for satire, for art movies to now preach the reform of Islam. She felt that creative people with a message on religion should have the freedom to speak on religion as the topic, which is, like any other topic. Why should you be afraid of speaking of religion? So she, in her mind, had an idea. She wanted to create an exhibition of wax idols which were based on women and the harassment of women in Islam, the oppression of women, and she wanted to call this exhibit Submission. She tried really hard to get funds for it and to try to come up with this exhibit. But then in May 2004, she met an artist, a filmmaker from Holland called Theo van Gogh. And she met him through a common friend. In this image, you see him sitting on the carpet. He offered to Ayan Hirsi, who you see standing in the white dress, that let us both make a film called Submission. The idea will be the same as the wax idols, but let us make a film instead of an exhibit. So the film was made. It was a 10 to 15-minute film, and it basically describes the submission which four Muslim women are subjected to, be it rape by relatives, be it beating by husband, or be it flogging for adultery. This movie is available on YouTube, and in case you have time, do watch it. It was aired on August 29, and obviously it was a highly controversial film, and she got a lot more threats for that. And in her words, to that criticism, she says, I am told that submission is too aggressive a film. Its criticism of Islam is too painful for Muslims to bear. Tell me, how much more painful it is to be for this women to be trapped in that cage. So this was a film which was made by her. However, Obviously, after making a film of this kind, things were not going to be silent. So in November 2004, Theo Van Gogh, her partner, was killed, not a partner, but a movie making partner, was killed on a busy street in Amsterdam. A 26-year-old Dutch citizen of Moroccan descent shot him, slit his throat, and pinned a 5-page indictment of Western society into his body. This murder set off a series of reactions because obviously the Dutch people were angry that they wanted freedom of expression, whereas the migrants were unhappy because Islam had been criticized. So there was arson, and Muslim schools and mosques were burnt, and the country came into deep crisis. After the murder, Ayan was extremely upset over his killing, and however, due to threats to her life, she was unable to attend his funeral or to meet his family. In the period of November 2 to November 27, Ayan was kept under tight security for 25 days. Nobody but the government security agency knew her whereabouts. She was moved several times within Holland and also to the US. Eventually, she did resume her parliamentary duties. She continued to do so till 2006. And then the issue of her having lied to change her name and her story to get the Dutch citizenship that caught up with her. Her citizenship was taken away. The government fell indirectly because of this reason, and new elections were called for. So, before I conclude this book review, I would like today she lives in the US, she lives under protection, and she continues to fight for the two causes which are closest to her heart, which is the reforms that she wants in Islam and also the subjugation of women. So she says that people accuse me of having interiorized a feeling of racial inferiority. So I attack my own culture out of self hatred because I want to be white. Tell me, is freedom only then for the white people? Is it self love to agree to be humiliated, mutilated, and powerless? So when I took a train to Amsterdam 13 years ago, I took a chance at life of freedom in which both my mind and I would be free from bondage to someone I had not chosen. This is what she answers on criticism to her personal freedom. Then she was criticized for talking against Islam. So she says that when people say that values of Islam are compassion, tolerance, and freedom, I look at reality and I see that it is not so. People in the West swallow this sort of thing because they have learned not to examine religions or cultures of minorities critically because they are afraid of being called racist. So when I do this, it fascinates them. She says that the message of this book, if it must have a message, is that with this passive attitude, we in the West would be wrong to prolong the pain of transition unnecessarily by elevating cultures full of bigotry and hatred towards women to a stature of respectable alternative way of life. So, as Mr. Vakil said, the last message that I would like to give from her behalf is that tolerance of intolerance is cowardice. Thank you. Mr. Vakil. Mr. Vakil. Shambhavi, is Mr. Vakil there?
Hello. 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 Hmm? Mira has lost. I see has lost the connection. બરાબર બરાબર છે કેન્સલ hello. Yeah, so I can am I audible? Yeah, I'm audible. Okay, thank you. Hello, sorry, participants. It seems Meera has got a problem with the bandwidth of her internet connection and she is lost. But let me say on behalf of everyone, it was wonderful, a great, lucid explanations and portrayal of an autobiography as it should be in simple words. And unfortunately, we have lost the connection with her. So, yeah, here she comes. Hello,
Yes,
can you hear me,
yes,
Mira? Yeah, you
yes, I
can hear.
can hear you. Yes, yes.
Yeah. So,
Sorry, she was lost.
let me express on behalf of all the participants gratitude for the presentation you have made. Excellent, and with flawless narration. You portrayed all the important facets of Lady Iron from her childhood, to the advanced adulthood she is now in, and until she became a member of parliament in Netherlands, and then in what circumstances she had to leave. In fact,
Right,
because of that life-changing statement of untruth to get out of the clutches of
correct,
repressive society. That made a huge change in her life and enabled her to live a very independent, dignified living, which was possible
correct,
in the
correct,
country which eventually she settled in Netherlands. But unfortunately, that also came against her, and it became a statement of untruth to disqualify her, and eventually I think even the that party also lost the majority in the government. Anyway,
right,
be that as it may, I'm just running through because there are lots of compliments. Everybody is so happy to have seen this presentation from you, and the way in which you came out with very nice narratives, and lots of compliments are there, and I'm just trying to see if there are any questions. And this one is a first question. And before that, one of the participants, Mr. Ashok, mentions that during the time when upheavals and coup was taking place in Somalia, he was also there
oh
incidentally.
wow,
So
oh
yeah, he
wow,
was there. He is one of the participants here at the moment. Yeah,
okay,
yeah. And
okay.
this question is from Sagar. Do you think Western culture is ideal to gender integration, or does it reflect other end of pendulum? Mira, over to you.
Can you please explain the question a little bit to me, Mr. Vakil?
The question put up by Vikas is Western culture ideal for gender integration, or does it reflect the other end of pendulum?
Um, well, if I were to comment on Ayan's own story and how she got integrated into the society after moving to Holland, I would say in a lot of ways it is ideal, more ideal as compared to the cultures that we have been exposed to or that Ayan was exposed to. What do you think?
Well, he will not be able to answer, except he can
Yes,
put the comment in the chat
yes,
box. What he is
yes,
trying to say is that, is Western society far superior for gender integration than others? I think, in my opinion, the answer is yes. I mean, as far as gender
yeah,
integration and I mean, the Western society, Western values have a decisive edge over, the
right,
others. Yeah, I mean, that goes without saying. Yeah. So
right.
on
They may
that
not,
aspect,
they may not have
yeah,
reached the level which we want the world
yes,
to, but they are
yes,
way ahead of us, I think.
absolutely, absolutely, right,
Right.
right, right. Okay, this question is from Rajiv.
Right.
Any reference of Indian society or Indian Muslims in the book? He's asking.
No, not really. In the book, she does refer to Indian families that she met during her stay in Kenya. But apart from that, I did some research on my own, especially when I was reading on the topic of female genital mutilation. And I realized there is a film on YouTube of the area in Bombay called Bhindi Bazaar, which is where it is rampantly done. And Bori girls are taken there for female genital mutilation. So, yes, we cannot say that we are insulated from these beliefs. And a lot of these practices are happening in India also.
Yeah, the next question is from Satish Bhai, which partly I think you already covered in your this immediate previous answer. Thought-provoking ideas, is it applicable to India? Would you like to comment, Mira, on this?
Yes, it is. It is, in fact, some of the beliefs which are taught in the name of Islam. We may not be taught to be slaves, but most girls, when they are raised, even in the Indian culture, are taught to be obedient, they are taught to be subservient. So I do feel that there is a slight amount of, not to that extent, we are much more empowered in India and we have much more access to education and to other facilities, but there was some parallelism as far as religious beliefs is concerned. We are also promised an afterlife and we are also scared.
Right.
I tease a lot of my friends of thunder lightning befalling them in case they don't do what God approves of. So, yes, some religious beliefs are parallel, some gender inequality is parallel, and we should all start thinking about it that, okay, we are more, privileged than the society she grew up in, but we should not take it for granted. And we should try and advance more and more.
Absolutely correct. There is a remark and, of course, appreciation. Ashok says that he has also read another book, which is The Kite Runner, having a
Yes,
similar story based on the conditions in Afghanistan.
right,
During the Taliban rule, something
right,
like that. Then
right.
Manmit gives a link to submission on the YouTube channel. Those who are interested, please note that link. This is this is a short film. Vikas is asking Ashok Bhai, Quiet Runner is also a beautiful movie. Yeah, that's what he corroborates. Kite Runner, this again, superb interview. Mira, this comment is getting viral, huh, Mira?
Thank you everyone for liking the review.
Yeah, in the process, the collateral benefit comes to me because people are thanking me also for bringing such good reviews. So that's a collateral benefit I'm getting.
Thank you for suggesting the book, Mr. Vakil. You suggested.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Acha, Surendra is asking very interesting review. However, things are not black and white as the book seems to convey. Many African countries were colonized and unless and exploited, which may explain poverty, to a considerable extent. Further, with all the modern, with all the freedom that women enjoy in the West, studies have shown that on average, women earn much less than men for the same work. This is what exactly, Surendra, I said at the beginning, that to this date, in all forms of society, in all parts of the world, the the participation in the mainstream and positions occupying that matter in the society is not gender agnostic. That was a very profound statement I made, and I think
Correct.
you are corroborating what I made assessment. Anyway,
Correct.
Mira, do you want to add anything on this?
So this criticism against colonialization, and the West can now look up and say we are advanced, but they were the ones who made these countries poor because of their colonial. So Ayan basically is aware of that. Her problem is that when states are still ruled by the law of God, then advancing, developing a free will, and changing things becomes more difficult. So she says that just as Europe broke the connection with the church as far as governing was concerned, she would advise that Islam also be reformed and they break the connection between the rule of God and actual good governance. And that is what she says in her book, she promotes in her book.
Surendra goes on further to ask you as a woman that women themselves are subjecting themselves to manipulation by men. Note, for instance, the move towards bringing back decency in dressing in beauty pageants. What are your comments, Mira, on this?
So, there is a lot of conditioning happening. The women who are objecting to the indecent dressing are the women who have been conditioned into thinking that this dress is good, this dress is bad. Who's responsible for this conditioning? Is it only the men and women, the society in general, or is it a few in power who do not want the women's status to be raised? So we have to constantly question this and we have to come about these points, but it's going to take time because, as Ayan, the only one who went against this conditioning, was outcast by her clan and by her society. We also risk that if we speak against it. So we need brave hearts. We need brave hearts who can speak on this topic and change the mindset of people. But it's not going to be sudden or overnight, for sure.
Right. Then the final two comments. One is from Satish Bhai. He says that your last cartoon slide tells everything. That is what. On that note, he thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Riddhi, I think a young girl, says very enriching and insightful. And let me add, it was very delightful too. Is that right? And Mira, on that note, I think we have dealt with all the comments and questions which have been put up in the chat box. Once
Yes.
again, let me acknowledge on behalf of the participants why people look forward to your reviews over the years, as and when they take place in Baroda book browsers. Stay safe, take care of your health, and
Thank
remain involved in Baroda book browsers as you have been. On that
thank
note, goodbye to everyone for now. We adjourn this meeting until we meet next in the month of October. Take care, stay safe, and enjoy your remainder of the Sunday. Thank you. Bye bye. And of
thank
course,
you, Baroda.
a big thank you to Sambhavi and Samir for all the continuing help to help us make the meetings possible. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sambhavi. Thank you, Samir. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Naman.
Superb.